Sometimes it takes it a minute. There we go. All
Okay.
right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our positivity and wellness, stress management, and self care talk. The voice you hear now is Derek Jackson. I'm a program specialist for first generation student programs here at UT Dallas. I am joined by JaeHee, who was working with our University Student Counseling Center here at UT Dallas, great friend of the program. And without further ado, I would just like to turn it over to JaeHee. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Gosh, you're welcome. I'm really glad to be here and share this space and feel that the discussion we are going to have today is both timely and relevant to so much that's going on in our world and so much of what I'm hearing from clients on a daily basis. So, my name is JaeHee Chung-Sherman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and therapist here at the Counseling Center. And I also just want to share out in terms of shared identity. I'm also a first gen college student, so I can really just sit in a space. Some of what I share today is from years of clients sharing out their own stressors and experiences, as well as being intertwined with some lived experience too. And so when I talk about stress management and self care, a lot of times this gets watered down into this idea that it's a real simplistic thing, that maybe this is something that could be a reward or something later on. But I'm really looking at this in terms of this space of liberation and this space of really taking a look at self compassion and a look, an internal and external look at what is going to help you as an individual manage the current stress, particularly during COVID 19, particularly during escalations of and historic racial violence and identity based stress and trauma as well. For those who hold intersectional marginalized identities. So, really wanting to incorporate that into our space today. I want to give a land acknowledgement for where I am sharing this out, that the land that I am coming from here in the Plano Richardson area was once inhabited by Comanche, Apache, and Blackfeet, and just want to honor the unceded territory and the land that was taken from Native Americans, and really opening up that space to honor that here today. Um, as well as for the people who built this area, in terms particularly of those who identify as marginalized individuals who may not have had choice related to the build and the production of where we are today. And so when we talk about stress management and self care, I'm also holding the stories, particularly those who may not have privilege or power, in terms of their own autonomy and own care. So when we think about that in terms of identity, and we think about that in terms of where we are in this space during COVID-19, how do you know when you're out of balance? What are the symptoms? What are the things that come up for you? And some of the general feedback that may bring individuals into the counseling center could be a number and a range of things, and most of these are all. I keep coming back to the word intersectional, but it's true. It's not just one thing, but it's usually multitudes of things, from academics, interpersonal relationships, balancing out work and private life, the concerns about the future, particularly right now during COVID, related to internships, related to employment opportunities, related to housing, related to financial stability. And when we add on the additional stressors of identity related to socio-political climate and the culture around us, in terms of marginalized experiences, particularly for those, for people of color, um, and also others who identify within marginalized communities. It's just existing and navigating in spaces that may or may not be welcoming, and really knowing how that can then impact the brain and the body and interrelated to health concerns, which shows up as stress, it shows up as anxiety, it shows up as depression, hypervigilance, responses to the unpredictable. And when we're looking at all these, as well as, extracurricular activities and building up my resume, building up all these different things, as well as family based, concerns, whether you have support, marginal support, or full support of the family, but maybe not a complete understanding of what you are going through in this moment, it can be really hard and sometimes can feel isolating and alienating of not knowing who do I turn to for those supports, who do I turn to normalize this experience that people can empathize with me, but they may not understand the process of what I'm going through. So, just in this place of reflection, is really thinking about what happens to your body when you feel stressed. What happens to your emotional state when you feel stressed? Many times in anxiety, we don't think about what the body and the brain are doing, and the body and brain are interconnected. And they're also formulated by lived experiences. So I go back to what my brain and body knows or recognizes in terms of stress. And I typically go back to these places when I was very young on how I cope with it. Do I reach out interpersonally and seek out supports, or do I withdraw? Do I isolate and really try to figure this out on my own? Have I been taking care of other people? And so, do I expend my energies ensuring other people are okay before I do? And that if they're okay, then I may feel less stressed out. But really, what is that doing to your brain and your body in that moment? And that it's okay not to be okay when you're stressed, because stress is also an indicator that something's going on, that something is outside the norm, and that for chronic stress, we learn to adapt to it. And so it may take a huge stressor or trauma to go, oh gosh, that was a big deal if you've been living under chronic stress. And I will share this, particularly as a first gen college student, there's a lot of different expectations and stressors that maybe other peers, other colleagues, other individuals aren't aware of. Maybe that's also the explanation of why I need to do this, or the 2 to 3 jobs or internships or different things that you may be trying to balance, and that chronic stress is normalized until it becomes so exponential, so big that maybe the body's saying, I can't do this much longer. Because then you add on a pandemic as well, and a lot of things are thrown out of balance. And they have been thrown out of balance for the last 14 months. It has been a global stress and trauma that has happened. And trauma being real specific in terms of the American Psychological Association's definition, it is something that is unpredictable and feels like a life threat. I don't know if I'm going to get sick. I don't know if someone who leaves the house will be harmed because of how they identify, or will be killed as how they identify. Or I don't know if I'm going to get the grade or get into this class because there's only a number of openings and everything's online. And I don't know how long that's going to last. So the body and brain, they download stress in the same way. Sometimes it doesn't know how to differentiate that. So here are some symptoms of stress, and just kind of look and take a look at, what pops out to you, what is like feels familiar. And you can have multiple symptoms. The physical symptoms are what I really like to hone in on, because a lot of times our bodies under stress will disconnect from what the brain is. So the brain is like, I've got to get this assignment done. I've got to show up at work. I've got to be able to do X, Y, and Z. I've got to finish my capstone project. I've got to be able to share out with friends or family or whoever that support system or chosen family may be, to go, okay, I need to finish all these things. So I may be ignoring the physical symptoms, which are they're kind of that red light, that warning light for the emotional symptoms, and then the cognitive. So the cognitive is it's kind of meta. It's what I notice, I'm noticing. But most of the time, the physical symptoms, these are normal in terms of stress. But when they're chronic, when they've been ongoing, that's when I really want to encourage people to pay attention to what is my body saying? Where do you hold your stress in your body? Do you hold in your back? Do you hold in your hands? When do you notice that your neck tenses or maybe your legs or feet tense? What happens then when the body is stressed out? What do you notice about your emotional symptoms? And sometimes this can be from this inability to function. I can't get up. Is it depression? Am I overwhelmed? Am I withdrawing? Are the things that I used to really enjoy, is that kind of gone to the back burner? And maybe I haven't noticed that for months because I have been so busy. And so the cognition or thinking about thinking is like you recognize, oh wait, I'm worrying, or I can't get these thoughts out of my head, or they're negative self-talk. And this is I can't make it. I shouldn't do this. This also comes in the form of imposter syndrome. And for many first gen, and I'll just share, including myself, this is an ongoing, do I belong in this space? You do, by the way, belong in these spaces. It is an honor for those spaces to have you in them and inhabit them. But these compulsive thoughts also come up in a narrative of like, am I going to be good enough? Is this going to be okay? So unhealthy coping can look like a number of things. And really, and let me just kind of frame unhealthy because this was part of like a general presentation. But I always say all behaviors are adaptive. All behaviors are a form of survival. And so some are going to be more beneficial than others, but they're all a form of adaptation. When they move into a realm that it may not be as helpful for you or for an individual or people who are close to you is when we move into a denial and avoidance to the point that we can't deny it anymore. And here's the thing, denial is a survival mechanism. Sometimes I've got to be able to compartmentalize enough to just finish and get through what I need to get through. But denial is helpful until it's not anymore. And there's only so much that the body can avoid and deny before the body is going to start physically letting you know in a very loud way, in a very overt way, I can't do this anymore. Kind of going back to those physical symptoms we were talking about. But it may also come in these forms of procrastination or overextension of yourself. Um, it may come in the form of substance overuse or a compulsion to utilize substance, gambling, sexual addictions, pornography, shopping, a lot of things that are actually escalating, we're finding in terms of observational and direct feedback in terms of mental health. And a lot of this makes sense when we are withdrawing. We as human beings are meant to connect to one another. Our brains and bodies need to connect. We are the only species, the only mammal who comes out of the womb looking for someone, looking for us, looking for someone to acknowledge our existence and our emotional state and our physical state. And we need each other to help kind of regulate that. And when I go into isolation or withdrawal, or I feel overwhelmed in terms of feeling known, sometimes I'm going to choose and I'm going to go to a strategy that may help me cope with that sense of overwhelm. This can be restrictive eating or binging, feeling like I'm eating too much or over exercise. This is where any kind of behavior moves into a state that it is now taking over my life. Am I restricting my eating so much that I'm constantly thinking about what I'm putting in my body, caloric intake in my body versus body neutral? neutrality and body positivity? Am I isolating? And so, or am I even having these thoughts of death and dying, though I may not have a plan or intent to die by suicide? Am I wanting to harm other people? Am I harming myself? This may be self-harming mechanisms to just feel something beyond feeling overwhelmed. And that is where we're moving into, getting professional help, being able to share out, I'm not okay right now. And being okay, who are the people in my life that feel safe enough to do that? And this is where we may find individuals really seeking those services through the counseling center, because it is okay to notice that I am feeling this way in this moment, and that this stress is legitimate and it's not in my head. And I don't have to do this alone. So finding this healthy balance, a healthy coping, or quote unquote a balance, is, the preparation for stress. And let me just share, particularly for those who hold marginalized and intersectional identities, particularly people of color, individuals can't mindfulness their way out of oppression. They can't prepare. That is part of that traumatic event of, like, I don't know when I'm going into a space if it's going to be safe for me. But it's this mindfulness of, like, this awareness that happens to go, I know if I have to engage in a certain space or a certain area in my life, that I may need more time to recover, and I may need more time just to prepare myself and not shame myself for not adapting or not showing up in a certain way, to go, that was incredibly stressful for me. So managing that sometimes by organizing time or the things that I can control. What does my environment look like in terms of my study space? I'm a big proponent that, your bed and the place that you sleep and the place that you rest, in terms of sleep hygiene. Sleep has really been altered, particularly during the pandemic. And it's already challenging as well when you're in college. But one of the things is looking at your environment. Are there ways I can organize? Because the mind and the body and the connection psychologically to your space really does have an impact. So there is direct research linked to this, in terms of just feeling like there's an organization and a flow to what's happening when I am studying, when I am resting, when I am eating and nourishing myself. Do I need to eat with other people? Does that help me feel connected? What does that look like in terms of social media, and in terms of digestion of the number of exposure that I have, particularly if you are carrying a lot of stress? News and constant alerts can really feel triggering. So, actually, what that does in terms of social media, there's a very small portion back here, but it's powerful, and it's located right at the core by our brainstem. And this connection is by our autonomic nervous system. And every time we get a hit, every time we get a like, every time there's a news that pops up on our phone or on our screens, there's a message that's sent there, and it actually sets off the fight, flight, or freeze. And it actually says something's new. You get a hit of dopamine for those likes. But when something happens that's a pushback or something else, or something that's very triggering, very personalized, it can also then send another response of what's called cortisol. So this is part of stress. It is a neurochemical, which is kind of like Clorox on the brain over time. And this sets off our fight, flight, or freeze. So when we look at what can I control in my environment in terms of stressors, I'm all about in terms of, like, what am I ingesting? What am I digesting? What am I feeding myself? Can I change what I can and accept, some of the things that I can't? What am I going to do to chunk my time for this day? So altering perceptions of stressors, that's kind of a give and take. There's, I think, a balance to that, particularly if you hold marginalized identities. I'm not altering my perception if I feel othered, or if I feel slighted, or if something has happened that has really been impactful for me. But I may need to find those comfort systems. Are there people I can reach out to? Are there people that I can share this with? If there's stressors that I feel like I can control versus a negative self-talk, is there a self-compassion piece to go? I'm human and I'm trying my best. I deserve to hold space in this moment. And so what do you do as well as creating a space for relaxation, self compassion? We as human beings are also wired for play. And I think as we get, as we mature, we kind of move away from that creative play. What energizes you? Is it art? Is it working with your hands? Is it being out in nature? Is it movies? Is it music? Sometimes finding these places of rejuvenation can feel really helpful in these moments of high and acute stress, particularly as you're heading into the end of the semester and everything is due. So these places of self-compassion and self-care isn't just this place of like, oh, I'm going to reward myself. How do you build this into the routine? So part of beginning the management of stress is short term. In the moment, breathing and just recognizing I'm stressed. I'm holding it in my body. I send a breath to where I'm stressed out. I've even had people hold their hands, breathe in, and throw it to the ground. You're actually discharging that energy. The long term is beginning to address some of the underlying causes, and that's being aware of your brain and your body, and also recognizing that the self compassion piece, the ways I take care of myself, the things that I enjoy are built into a routine. The brain and body love routine. And especially during the pandemic and times of unpredictability, we seek out routine wholeheartedly. And so what are you doing to take care of yourself, to shower? If you take vitamins, medication, this is part of self-care. This is a part of self-compassion, of liberation of yourself from these spaces that say perform, 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 work, work, work. I carve out this time. Do I have time to eat that's regular during the day? Do I have snacks I enjoy? Am I hydrating myself? Am I doing the things that I need to really take care of my brain and my body? Because if you burn out, everybody else, you can't take care of anybody else on empty either. So I talked a little bit about calming the body, and then the things that we say to ourselves is incredibly powerful. And there's actually some really interesting research. And I am, please disabuse me, related to the exact focal point neurologically, brain wise, where this is housed. But there's been longitudinal research that negative othering moments, impacts of marginalization, impacts of negative verbal interactions actually have the same correlation, the same correspondence with the body and brain as if somebody were to hit you, as if someone were to physically aggress you, that the body and the brain can't tell the difference. And it goes for the same. I share out the things that you tell yourself. Would you ever tell that to someone that you deeply care about, that you deeply respect? And so the question is, what is giving you permission? Where have you learned that to say it to yourself? Because in a lot of ways, it's like literally physically abusing and hitting yourself. So calming the mind is then looking at the consideration when I'm stressed. Maybe I say these things, negative things to myself. And it doesn't mean I have to believe it at once, but it may mean, you know what? Rather than I'm weak, I'm getting stronger and I'm learning this every day. I am meant to make mistakes and I learn from these versus the world is falling apart. And in a lot of times it can feel that way, especially as first gen when you feel like you may be carrying the expectations and responsibilities and so many things on your shoulder. And so we've talked about, or I have, about stress activating our fight, flight, or freeze. And that's going to respond in those early physical symptoms that we talk about. So that's actually some fight, flight, or freeze. And when that's not tended to, sometimes it moves into what we call panic attacks, which can feel really overwhelming for the body. Doesn't mean that you're going to die, but it really means like the body's like in hyper responsive state. And one of the things that we can do as human beings is actually breathing and oxygenating the body. I'm human and I'm meant to be here. I breathe in. I breathe that in all the way to the diaphragm and I breathe out. Because what that's doing is oxygenating. So a primitive response is actually making ourselves smaller, holding our breath, which is going to impact digestion. It's going to impact my cognitive abilities. Is I'm not going to be able to use my high brain when I'm constant fight, flight, or freeze. And this includes studying. This includes executive function. I call this like neurological economics. I'm not going to have the ability to think about my past or my future. I'm wanting to pull back and I want to be in the present. And so sometimes even just putting, cold water on my face and moving something into my body into something, shifting it into something different can actually then move me out of this hyper responsive state or hyper vigilant state and kind of noting my breath and noting what's going on in my body. So, really, then looking at, rehearsing when you're in a calmer space, reassuring thoughts for yourself. And if you can't do that, are there other people who can help you do that? Are there other people that you can hear in your mind as that base of like that foundation of like, I have that. Some people don't. And some people, it's really hard to believe that within yourself. And if that is a challenge, being really gentle with yourself, could it be possible that you just begin, even in apps like Headspace, even in apps of these places where I can learn just to be, acknowledge where I'm at today is exactly where I'm supposed to be at today, even if you don't believe it. Where I'm at today is exactly where I'm supposed to be today, and that I can only control what I know how to do. So these thoughts of, I don't know what I don't know yet, and we're not supposed to know everything. Can I calm my mind enough to do that? Okay. So some underlying just some ideas about identifying stressors is looking at, what are the inventories that create kind of a list of like more primary stressors and more tertiary, secondary stressors. What are the things in my environment that really stress me out? Is it a loud arena? Is it a place where I can continue to hear shuffling? Am I going to need to put, if I go into a task, do I have the ability to put earplugs in? What are the things that can help me kind of navigate the spaces? If I know that I'm going to be in a certain space that is going to be more heightened for me, I can begin some of the routines that I've already had in terms of breathing, in terms of when I'm sharing out with myself. Then how much time are you going to allow yourself to give yourself permission to calm your brain and body down afterwards? Because it can be really stressful. I may need 1 or 2 hours. I may need an afternoon off. And so if I know that I've got a major presentation and it's really stressful and being in social spaces creates anxiety for me, rather than fighting the anxiety and shaming self to go, why can't you do this? Versus the acceptance of, okay, this is a stressor for me. This isn't my wheelhouse. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to feel this. I'm going to do what I need to do to take care of myself. And then afterwards, I allow myself, not as a reward, but as self compassion to go, I may need to take a good 1 or 2 hours off. These are the boundaries that you get to set for yourself. That I may not be able to respond to immediately to text messages, because I remind people no is a full sentence too. And that's where you can help set some boundaries for yourself when it comes to what some of these stressors may be. Am I overextending myself in one area that maybe it's okay for me to pull back and say, today I've got an exam and so I need 2 or 3 hours of study time, and I'm not going to answer that call immediately. I'm not going to be able to get to that, and that this is my boundary. So those who really respect your boundaries, because boundaries are a healthy thing to have, those who respect your boundaries also respect their own. And those who may not or push back on boundaries kind of gives you a little nudge to say, okay, they may be benefiting from you not having boundaries. And so it's okay to set that up for yourself so you don't feel like you have to overextend and say yes to all things. And I think, particularly with the pressure as a first gen student, there's a lot of pressure, whether that is self-induced or societally or through um, those who have just well intentions, sometimes maybe not as much, um, that these expectations, if I don't do this, if I don't accomplish it, if I don't finish this, then that's going to look poorly upon me, or that I may not be meant for this. And that is not true. Those boundaries are healthy steps as you pursue your academic and your professional space. And that may be something new to consider. So developing a plan, we talked about listing and identifying, what do I want to see out of that? And so these are some more tangible things, identifying the next action step. How am I going to pursue this? Maybe that's I take a walk every day. Maybe that is, I enjoy music and I enjoy space, or I go and I move and I'm doing what I need to do to take care of self. I have a snack. Um, you know, well, I'm not going to go and I am not Marie Kondo. Um, I'm definitely not, and definitely not dismissing or sharing out negativity related to those who have more specific minimalist ideas or plans. But when we're looking at stacks of to dos, sometimes that can be really overwhelming and things can physically build up. So, again, kind of looking at your environment as well. And so these are real basic, and then I want to open this up for questions. What we're looking at is a really good routine, sleep hygiene, eating. If you're really noticing that eating has shifted, and I'm hearing so much related and much more to like this very like diet culture that can be so incredibly toxic and harmful, and oppressive, particularly with COVID and body image, that if you're really struggling with this is where I also share out, please seek out the services professionally and with those that you trust. Because this is going to impact sleep, it's going to impact concentration. So if I'm not getting enough nutrition, I'm not going to sleep well. Or if I can't get to a nutritious meal because of finances or because of time. We do have through our wellness center, there's free assistance online, particularly in terms of food and nutrition and ideas to really help, particularly if as first gen this may be the first time where I'm really having to do a food plan and look within a balanced budget, or what this may look like, to ensure that other people in my close circle are taken care of too. So there's a lot of different things that I can recognize that individuals may be balancing. And so ensure that your schedule, like that routine of showing up for class, can be as normalized and predictable as possible, particularly in asynchromatic or asynchronous classes. This is really hard because if you're working all day, you're working multiple jobs. I'm doing what I can do, but is there a routine that's set with that? As much as possible, is that brain and body are really going to crave that, and then I can kind of balance out my day, scheduling time to relax, and then the delegation. This is hard, but being able to ask for help. So I always share this out that in terms of a secure base, secure foundation, um, you know, more secure individuals both give and receive help, and in equitability, that it is okay to ask for help. It is okay to receive help, and sometimes that can feel incredibly, guilty, or shame filled of like, I should be able to do this, particularly if you've been doing so much independently. But again, we are interdependent on one another. So that self care is really important when we're looking at our own health, our own well being. So, common myths about self care: it's selfish to put myself first. It is not. I don't have time. We have to make time. And this is hard, especially on a really hectic schedule. But even if this is 5 or 10 minutes of just kind of downloading what is important for you. Self care can only happen when I'm alone or done. So, again, this is more this reward base, but it's not. This, again, build this in that this is part of my routine in terms of self compassion, where I'm looking at this in a different way. That my break from all of this, my break is called self sustaining. How is this sustainable? How is this going to be manageable for you? So very quickly, definitely want to go to some Q&A, but for those who are seeking services right now, everything is being offered virtually. Um, at this time for overall wellness and health. But we are offering all of these different services at the UTD Student Counseling Center. And so please feel free to reach out to us. There are licensed clinicians, psychologists, and psychology interns and practicum therapists, all trained and working related to intersectionality, social justice, and the intersection with mental health and wellness, particularly during this time. And so I definitely want to open this up for any questions. Let me just share out the Student Counseling Center's opening our hours are from 8 to 5:30. We stopped taking new electronic intake forms about an hour before closure, and mainly just so we can ensure that we're in contact with anyone who may be in crisis. So that just gives us time and space. But always remember, UTD Talk is available for all UTD students. If you are feeling in crisis, feeling overwhelmed in terms of suicide, homicide, any emergency service, please call UTD Talk, and they can provide services, and then as well as reaching out to us. All right, I'm going to end the show and then open this back up for any Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to present this very valuable information. I certainly learned a lot. And there were a few questions that were submitted via social media, Instagram.
Mhm.
By the way, if you're watching this, give us a follow at UT Dallas First Gens on Instagram so you too can submit questions. Um, there were a couple about really highlighting the importance of separating, if you can, the workspace and your resting space. So I got a question. Um, I've heard that it's important to separate my work area from my rest area. Um, is that really important, or was it just a myth?
No, it actually is. There's actually significant research related to that body, mind, and space connection. And so being able to separate the body and brain want to know where it's going to rest. And so this is actually a very primitive functionality of us as human beings, as mammals, that we need to know that there's a safe place to lay our head. And if this is associated with additional stress, if this is associated with work, like I need to perform, I need to achieve, I need to finish something that may also be correlated to stress and anxiety, it's really important that we begin to separate out that space. So I am a big proponent that the bed is really there for rest and for particularly if in terms of other intimate activities. I will leave it at that. But the bed itself is really a place that I share really needs to be a protected space that it really is that safe space for the body to know this is where I go to relax, this is where I go to rest and rejuvenate. And that in my other space, that this is the body and brain begin then to associate that space with I go to work, I do the things. And so being able to modulate the difference. If you've got your laptop and you're doing your homework and you're sitting up in bed and you're eating and answering the phone and doing all the things, that can happen every now and then. And a lot of times, particularly those who may have, in terms of needing accessibility, in what ways then do you differentiate if if it is accessibility issues that you need your bed, then how do you differentiate maybe that is only during this certain time of the day am I working from my bed space? Because there's also, it could be like I am only in my room and my roommates are outside, or there's not a lot of space to separate, and so that routine is going to be really important to differentiate. So I'm not doing it right before I go to bed. I always share that all blue light, that's like laptops, phones, tablets, is actually turned off 30 minutes before bed, because the brain actually it sets off the fight, flight, or freeze. The autonomic nervous system, that blue light says, oh, we're awake now. And so it can take 30 minutes to an hour to actually come